Hi, my name is Frank Pendrell, and thanks for tuning in to my community engaged design proposal. So I was going to start this in a video format in order to explain a little bit better how I came about the development of this framework and tenants and how I would apply them to a neighborhood like Ludlow. So the name of my project is called Urban Roots, and it's centered on establishing community roots at the Ludlow School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I operated with a design framework that is centered on this core idea of introducing to a site a seed that can then grow and facilitate a community over time and through phasing. So just as a seed would be tossed into bare soil, a mobile ecology lab, known as a MEL for short, would arrive at a barren and empty site. The MEL would begin to respond to its environment just as a seed would, and begin to put out roots in response. Using environmental and community data collected on-site, the MEL would begin to grow from the ground up to create a valuable asset tailored directly to the community it's intended to serve, and urban roots would begin to take hold. Just as in nature, the first things to grow would be the pioneer species that capitalize on the empty niches in the neighborhood environment. By using technology to connect people and process, those gaps, be they environmental, social, or economic, can be addressed in a positive and holistic way. The potential program informs how the structures and landscapes can be designed to encourage and facilitate each given outcome. Through successional development, this design strategy is reactive to an ever-changing urban ecology. Based on neighborhood social, environmental, and economic demographics, Urban Roots hopes to provide experiences that relate to and encourage healthy living, social interaction, and community empowerment. By strategically combining landscape structures and programs tailored to the local community, Urban Roots seeks to provide a strong foundation for communities to develop together in our age of over-individualization and separation. So, with that framework, I began to make a lot of assumptions about considering we're not following through to a design. And those were facilitated by the development of these tenants that we've come up with over the course of this semester. So I developed 4 core tenets that helped inspire how I would apply this type of framework to a more specific area like Ludlow. So my tenets were, number 1 was build from the bottom up. I believe that strong communities grow just like plants from the bottom up, and strong roots are needed to support the community as it grows. So all design strategies should support and allow for phasing and adaptation over time. Just like a redwood tree, communities take time and resources to grow. Nothing happens overnight, and by providing reactive strategies over time, the built environment can adapt to the community as opposed to the community being forced to adapt to their built environment. The urban ecology is where our social habits interact with our landscapes and structures, and should allow it to be grown from the bottom up and in a healthy and equitable way. My second tenet is that you should always focus on growing community. Education is a foundation of an informed population that are able to make intelligent and forward-thinking decisions for themselves and as a society. So learning is a lifelong process and should be encouraged at every step of the way, across generations, races, genders, and economic situations, and should be a constant in all design thinking. My next tenet was focused on the idea of sinks and sources, and through understanding cycles and systems and the importance of holistic approach, and examining the inputs and outputs of what goes into our school systems and our societies, we begin to address in a more complete way on how to approach problems. The waste from one cycle might be fuel for another, and if schools and entire school systems become accountable and responsible for their actions around sustainability, students, parents, and entire communities could learn greater social responsibility for their collective actions. And my final tenet seems to be a standard among a lot of the people in this field, which is super encouraging. But that centers on communication and collaboration. I mean, we're only as strong as our weakest link, and I believe that the over-specialization of modern academia has cost us the common language needed to synthesize the kind of community-driven school systems implied by the previous tenets. So specialists from all sectors need to be able to collaborate and communicate on important issues, especially the layout, structure, and function of school systems, on educating our next generation of communities. Only through effective use of our knowledge can we hope to achieve a thoughtful and masterfully created community as a result. And just knowing when and how to ask for help is an important part of any development process. So once we get down to the actual Ludlow hybrid, I began to identify some of the urban roots of Philadelphia and was attracted to its industrial roots. It was a huge importing city all through early America. And I chose to highlight some of the repurposed railroad equipment and materials into the design approach in order to create this feeling of to relate the industrial roots to the environmental degradation that's found and loss of biodiversity in a lot of our really post-industrial areas. So ultimately what I discovered would be an interesting approach to this framework in Ludlow would be an investigation into the environmental and social justice elements surrounding industrialization through this experience of outdoor education. So I'm going to draw something on this whiteboard. So one of the things that I was thinking about was how over time the environment changed in Philadelphia insofar as it used to have a nice natural rolling landscape. The river ran through there. They used to do so much shipping on the river. They were a huge export city. We're talking about a really natural East Coast wet climate that I'm sure had just an immense amount of biodiversity, birds, trees, plants, insects. And I think that as development started happening, and it started small with just log structures and a few people, you got to keep some trees. They integrated with nature. Then you start getting more houses, more standard settlements, and then you're talking about this flattening out of the earth, the quarantining of everything, the development of the high-rises, and industry, right? Just pumping out smoke. And now you've just lost any trace of what was there at all. And I think that through the Ludlow example, you can start to see how this transition is buried and how there's an opportunity to start exploring that through outdoor play. So the model for the Ludlow hybrid seeks to investigate the history of an industrial city through outdoor education that encourages them to further explore deeper issues about social and environmental justice. By educating children to think critically about how interconnected our industrial actions and our environmental conditions are, we'd be able to build an educated and ecologically conscious generation from the bottom up. This bottoms-up approach to social responsibility would likely have a strong positive effect on the growth of the entire community, which would encourage lifelong learning at all stages. Through understanding of our city's industrial sinks and sources, children would begin to develop the skills and mental frameworks needed to think critically about the social consequences of their actions and to encourage behavioral change. Lastly, this approach would encourage children to become social and environmental activists by collecting real data, drawing solid conclusions, and communicating the results to the public, and in creating the collaborations necessary for change. The urban roots of the Ludlow neighborhood tie directly to the city's industrial past, and Philadelphia offers a unique opportunity to bring the environmental effects of industrialization to light in a new way. And frankly, who better to engage the issue than the very generation that will be forced to deal with it? So that I get into a little bit more specifics of what I might have imagined this design could look like. In terms of the landscapes, I want them to educate, to inspire, and to evolve. So some of those examples would include a pollinator garden, incorporating water-wise planting, especially here in Colorado. That's a good one. Organic produce via the understanding of soil ecology. So not just growing food to grow food and understand the food systems, but really understanding the whole seed-to-table growth of food and how that translates from an urban ecology standpoint. Using railroad ties for raised beds and other material reflections to the industrial past within that landscape. creating habitat gardens for birds, insects, even using industrial pieces for bird baths, etc. And also beginning to engage the street with those landscapes to encourage better social data collection. If more people interact with the site, the more data we'll collect. The structures would begin to be repurposed, reusable, and responsive. The mill is the main unit, and it's made from an old shipping container, which already kind of notes to that railroad industrial past. The outdoor classroom could incorporate more of that materiality from repurposed steel and railroad ties. Incorporating an outdoor kitchen that facilitates water reuse, gray water education, and how to be more water conscious in a really holistic way in the garden. Building bat boxes and bird houses and vermicomposting setups to encourage more ecology on site. In even using a small ecological library that's based off of Philadelphia's history and previous data to compare the differences of then and now and how industrial revolution played a part in that. And hopefully also a greenhouse that would be able to begin to tie a lot of those things together in managing and changing soils and understanding those in a deeper level. And lastly, the program is all about learning and teaching about data collection and app development. You want weather, soil, and social data to be part of this system. Species monitoring of the area to see what's present as opposed to what used to be present. Soil monitoring, composting, and compost tea as approaches to really understanding the full ecology in urban settings from the ground up. And that would incorporate lab work, microscope work, and the ability to start getting some economic empowerment by selling the products from the garden, including the compost and compost tea, and educating that surrounding community based off of those things you're able to sell. Obviously bringing up the social justice issues between industry and environment, and the historical ecological analysis of learning the history of your ecology and how it was. And the understanding of ecosystem services, how you're able to use other species to help you get to your goal. And these are really the ideas that I had just as an example of one way you can start to be doing this data-driven collection and analysis and phasing and reactive kind of design that I think really could empower communities to control and have say in how their cities develop in the future. So I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.